Listen closely to what Mike Huckabee, the man chosen to be the United States ambassador to Israel, just declared to the entire nation. When asked whether the will of the American people matters in deciding on a war with Iran, he replied,
"We don't live in a world where you have a poll taken to find out whether our policy should be a particular direction."
That is a staggering statement, folks, because right now, data shows that only 21% of Americans support a war with Iran. That means nearly 80% of the people are saying no. Yet our future ambassador suggests our peon brains shouldn't interfere with policy decisions. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, a great friend of this show, didn't hesitate to call this a blatant betrayal of democracy. But the issue doesn't stop at arrogance. Sachs points to a darker truth behind Huckabee's seat. This is not policy built on national security or international law. This is policy driven by a dangerous delusion. Sachs describes Huckabee as the quintessential Christian Zionist, a man trying to run the U.S. State Department based on his reading of biblical passages from 2,500 years ago. We are in the year 2026, yet the people holding the fate of American soldiers in their hands want to define the borders of the Middle East based on ancient prophecies instead of geopolitical reality. Sachs warns that if the U.S. government does not immediately repudiate Huckabee's claims about supporting further Israeli territorial expansion, we are throwing ourselves into a black hole of chaos with no way out. This is not diplomacy. This is a crusade masquerading as foreign policy. Let's return to the reality of what happened, rather than religious fairy tales. Professor Jeffrey Sachs just threw a bucket of cold water on the entire White House narrative about Iran being an unstoppable nuclear threat. He reminded us of a truth that the current administration is trying to erase from public memory. We had a deal, a real deal. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action known as the JCPOA was signed. This wasn't a scrap of paper. It was an international agreement unanimously adopted by the UN Security Council, including all 5 permanent members, the US, UK, France, Russia, and China. This deal established the most rigorous monitoring system in human history, allowing the International Atomic Energy Agency to oversee every single inch of Iran's nuclear activities. And folks, Iran complied with it. Every intelligence report confirmed that. So why did Donald Trump rip it up in 2018? Jeffrey Sachs gave an answer that couldn't be more direct. Because Trump is Benjamin Netanyahu's pawn. Sachs argued that tearing up this agreement was never truly about nuclear weapons. If we wanted to prevent nuclear weapons, we would have kept the agreement that was working perfectly. No, the real goal here is regional hegemony. Sachs pointed out that Israel's policy, repeated year in and year out, is to topple any government in the Middle East that dares to oppose their influence. Israel wants to overthrow the regime in Iran, period. This isn't Sachs's speculation. It is the widely publicized policy of the Netanyahu government. And Washington, instead of acting for the security interests of Americans, is acting as the enforcer for another nation's agenda. Look at the list Sachs just provided. Why did we bomb Libya in 2011? Why was the CIA ordered to topple Bashar al-Assad in Operation Timber Sycamore in 2012? And why did we invade Iraq in 2003 based on fabricated evidence of weapons of mass destruction? Sachs asserted that it all follows a single pattern. America is clearing the way for Israel by destroying any government that blocks their hegemony. What is the price of this obedience? $7 trillion in endless wars. Tonight, as Netanyahu appears at the White House to ensure his vassal, as Sachs calls him, continues to do the wrong thing, we must ask, who is America really serving? Focus on the language being used to push us into another war in the Middle East. Jeffrey Sachs just deconstructed one of the most bizarre and deceptive terms currently being peddled on American airwaves: industrial-grade bomb. This is the phrase that Steve Witkoff, the man we are told is a negotiator, is using to describe the state of Iran's nuclear program just months after the so-called Operation Midnight Hammer. Stop for a moment and ask yourself, what does industrial-grade bomb actually mean? In nuclear physics, there is no such term. Jeffrey Sachs calls this pure nincompooperi. He points to a bitter truth that in the U.S. negotiation rooms today, there are no actual nuclear experts. We don't have people who understand the science. We only have people who excel at using fear-mongering words to mask a complete lack of diplomacy. The Trump administration's current argument is, we are frustrated because Iran refuses to capitulate, but Jeffrey Sachs flips this narrative ruthlessly. He asks, capitulate to what? Iran has consistently said for over 15 years that it does not want a nuclear weapon. They have agreed to the most rigorous monitoring from the International Atomic Energy Agency, but Washington, under pressure from Israel, refuses to take yes for an answer. Sachs exposes the logical trap we are laying for Tehran. We tell them, we are going to kill you. We are going to overthrow you unless you disarm. But if they disarm, it makes it even easier for us to kill and overthrow them. It is an absurdity to its core. Operation Midnight Hammer 7 months ago, which Trump praised as the greatest thing since history began, was, according to Sachs, a useless attack. It stopped nothing. It only made the world more dangerous and turned American proclamations into blatant lies. We are living in a world where, from morning till night, we are fed fabricated information, where baseless terms like industrial-grade bomb are used to pave the way for a conflict the American people do not want. Look at how our foreign policy is being conducted not through diplomacy, but through financial cruelty. Jeffrey Sachs has just exposed a plot that the New York Times and mainstream media seem to have forgotten to report in detail. It's about Scott Bessent, the United States Secretary of the Treasury, and what he calls economic statecraft. At the Davos Forum on January 20th, in a nonchalant interview with Fox Business, Scott Bessent admitted a terrifying truth. He stated that U.S. policy is now to crush the Iranian economy. The goal is not negotiation. The goal is to destroy their currency, create a U.S. dollar shortage, cut off imports, and drive the Iranian people into such misery that they are forced into the streets to riot. And folks, he said this with a smirk of satisfaction, claiming everything is moving in a very good direction. Jeffrey Sachs pointed out a critical fact about this man. Scott Bessent is not an economist concerned with global stability. He is a man who built his wealth and reputation by attacking currencies. He is a speculator, a literal financial mercenary. And now, he is bringing that same predatory mindset into the Treasury Department to execute a campaign that destroys the lives of millions of ordinary people. People who have no say in their government's nuclear program. Sachs asks a question every American needs to ponder. Is this truly the statecraft we want representing America? Destroying the economies of nations that are saying they want to negotiate with us? We are using the power of the dollar not to build order, but to create calculated chaos. The New York Times may eagerly report on the protests in the streets of Tehran, but they ignore the fact that our own Treasury Secretary has admitted to being the one pulling the strings behind that suffering. We live in a world where economic brutality is labeled as strategy, and people like Bessent are turning the Treasury into an office of economic assassination to serve geopolitical delusions that Jeffrey Sachs warns will drag us all into an irreversible disaster. Let's talk about the collapse of the so-called paper of record. Jeffrey Sachs has just delivered a fatal blow to the credibility of the New York Times and the entire mainstream media apparatus in Washington. He calls it a delusional dream world, where propaganda and falsehoods are packaged as objective reporting every single day. The newspaper we once trusted to check power is now serving as the loudspeaker for a preordained war script. Look at how they report the possibility of war. They use headlines like Trump considers targeted strikes as if it were a routine management option, a mild administrative procedure. They present the bombing of a sovereign nation as an inevitability. But here is what Jeffrey Sachs exposes. They are completely silent regarding actual diplomatic efforts. Did you know that just 10 days ago, the Iranian foreign minister, Mr. Araghchi, delivered a profoundly important speech in Doha? He outlined a detailed roadmap for regional peace, proposing a two-state solution and a mutual security system for the entire Middle East. It was a direct response to Marco Rubio's demands. But what did the New York Times do? They didn't write a single line about that speech. They ignored its existence. Sachs even questioned their reporters, and the response was a chilling silence. When the media only reports on capitulation and never on compromise, they are participating in the manufacturing of consent for violence. They are normalizing a war the American people do not want by hiding the alternatives. Jeffrey Sachs calls this a bizarre game, where facts about Iran's past compliance are erased to be replaced by fear-mongering scenarios of industrial-grade bombs. This is not journalism. This is complicity. The New York Times labels U.S. triggered protests as the will of the people, while completely ignoring that our own Treasury Secretary admitted to economic sabotage to create that very chaos. We are being led by headlines designed to psychologically prepare us for a disaster. And as Professor Sachs warned, if we do not see through this propaganda mask, we will find ourselves dragged into another multi-trillion-dollar war based on lies printed in black and white. Let's talk about a rare ray of hope amid the gloom of war scenarios. While we've been preoccupied with conspiracies in the Middle East, another legal battle has been quietly unfolding at the Supreme Court, and it just ended in an embarrassing defeat for Donald Trump's ambition for absolute power. Jeffrey Sachs, who rarely praises current institutions, couldn't help but shout bravo to Chief Justice John Roberts. Here is what happened. The Supreme Court just issued a ruling striking down the tariffs that Trump unilaterally imposed through the IEEPA Act. You need to understand the weight of this. Throughout 2025, Trump used tariffs like a bludgeon to threaten the world, turning them into a personal diplomatic tool. But Chief Justice Roberts, whom Sachs called a brilliant former classmate, stood up to remind the White House of a fundamental principle. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. The Constitution mandates that the power to lay and collect taxes and duties belongs to Congress, not a single individual in the Oval Office. Sachs exposes that Trump's unilateral revamp of the tariff system was illegal and tyrannical. We founded this nation on a protest against a single man imposing taxes on the colonies, and the Supreme Court just prevented history from repeating itself in the worst way possible. But look at the real-world consequences, Sachs pointed out, which economic news often ignores. This tariff policy was a total technical failure. In 2025, even as Trump claimed to be protecting American workers, our manufacturing sector lost 83,000 jobs. The goods trade deficit didn't shrink, it grew. Sachs calls this a combination of stunning incompetence and stupid bullying. He notes that even a first-year economics student could have predicted this failure, yet the administration charged ahead just to feed one man's ego. Roberts' ruling is not just a legal victory, it is a reaffirmation that bullying cannot substitute for an understanding of international economics. Trump illegally seized $140 billion from American pockets through these taxes, and Jeffrey Sachs sent a steel-cold message tonight. We want our part back. You can't just say, "Oh, well, wasn't that something?" and move on. It was a brazen power grab, and the final shield of the Constitution was raised just in time to stop it. Folks, we have traveled through a journey from Mike Huckabee's religious delusions and the fabricated terms like industrial-grade bombs to Scott Bessent's currency sabotage plots. When you link it all together, the image that emerges is not one of a smart national security strategy. It is calculated chaos serving the interests of a foreign nation and financial speculators instead of the American people. Jeffrey Sachs left us with a number that no one can ignore. $140 billion. That is the amount the Trump administration illegally collected from your pockets through unconstitutional taxes. Sachs isn't just asking for an apology, he is demanding a refund. You cannot build an empire on deception and the theft of power and expect it to endure. We stand at a historical turning point in this year of 2026. We have an ambassador who wants to run diplomacy with a Bible, a Treasury Secretary proud of crushing other people's economies, and a media system like the New York Times paving the way for war by ignoring genuine peace offers. Professor Sachs's warning is clear. If we continue down this path, the path of delusions and unconditional subservience to foreign agendas, the price will no longer be just $7 trillion. It will be the soul of American democracy and the safety of the entire world. We must demand the truth. We must demand adherence to the Constitution. And as Jeffrey Sachs said, we must demand back what was stolen from us.